So the next movie we watched was Treasure Planet. And Treasure Planet was a movie I was really excited to watch. So to give some background, I used to visit, while I was still living in Illinois, I used to visit up here in California, every summer to visit my grandparents. And my grandma one summer took me to a local library, and I rented this movie. I rented Treasure Planet on DVD, I want to say. And I took it home, and I watched it at their house, and it blew my fucking mind. I was like 9 years old. I want to say I watched it like 15 times that week. I watched it like once or twice a day. It felt like 15 times, you know? I fucking loved this movie when I was a kid, and I'd never seen it since. And I would always vouch for it for how awesome it was, but I haven't seen it in like over 10 years. So when I realized that it was on the list, I was pretty excited. I was very looking forward to rewatching this. And there was a part of me that was like, is this movie, does it hold up? Is it, because you know when you watch something when you're a kid and you're like really into it then, and you go back to revisit it and you're like, oh, this is not as good as I remember it being. And you're almost, sometimes I'm almost a little afraid to go back and revisit things. I'm like, is it actually good? So we rewatched it. Kat also has not seen it in a really, really long time. I don't think she really even remembered anything about it. I remembered a lot more about it, I realized, as it went on. But she was practically watching it like fresh. And this is the best fucking Disney movie. This is the fucking greatest. This is the best movie they ever fucking made. It's the top dog, dude. Treasure Planet is so good. This movie fucking rules. It's so good. It is as good as I remember it being when I was a kid. It absolutely holds up. And now as an adult, I'm able to... It's funny. I had such good taste as a kid. Because now, it's as good as I remember it being, but now I have, like, the vocabulary and the ability to kind of understand why I liked it so much and why I still like it so much. Which was really satisfying. Where do I even begin? Where do I even begin on Treasure Planet? So, this is a movie that was directed by these two gentlemen. What were their names? Blah, blah, blah. I really should have looked this up beforehand. It was the two guys who did like a bunch of... Yeah. The Treasure Planet from 1982. What is that? What the fuck is this? It's like a Russian animated film? That's weird. Ron Clements and John Musker, who were also responsible for a bunch of the quote-unquote Disney Renaissance pictures. They pitched Little Mermaid. So they were the writers on Little Mermaid, Aladdin. They later did Moana. They did Hercules. They did Winnie the Pooh and A Day for Eeyore. Oh, that's sweet. Also The Black Cauldron, The Great Mouse Detective. They were, not always the most successful movies for Disney, but some of the most acclaimed that really got them back on their feet. And in the original pitch meeting, where they pitched all of their ideas that eventually became a lot of those Renaissance era movies, Treasure Planet was one of them. They said, we want to do Treasure Island in Space. That was literally the film's working title, was Treasure Island in Space. And Disney just kind of like, can you make this one for us? Can you keep me? They made 5 movies for Disney. They made 5 movies for Disney. Took them 10 years, and finally, around when did it start production? I want to say like probably late 90s, like 97 or something. They finally gave them the green light. This was released 2002, greatest year in history, because I was born. 2000. Okay, yeah. So it began work in 2000. It was an extremely expensive movie. So Treasure Planet is an adaptation, sort of a reimagining. Really, it's not so much of an adaptation or a remake. It is a reimagining of Treasure Planet, the classic. Why can't I remember the guy? Excuse me. Why can't I remember the guy's name now? Robert Louis Stevenson. That's the guy. The classic Robert Louis Stevenson novel about a boy who joins a ship, a ship on its voyage to find a buried treasure. A very classic, kind of archetypal pirate story, like pirate adventuring on the high seas type of story. In this one, it's this Treasure Planet has this really cool. Where do I even start with this movie? It has this really great setting. It's sci-fi. They called it the 70-30 rule. It's essentially where it was 30% sci-fi, 70% like roughly Victorian era style stuff. So you've got things like there's cyborgs and aliens and holograms and lasers and all that, right? And solar powered ships and all that. But the ships are like, they look like wooden boats. They're big wooden barges with sails, and the sails pick up solar rays, right? The characters are dressed in sort of Victorian era clothing. The main character's mom owns an inn that's in a very kind of colonial style, right? So there's this mishmashing of these two different aesthetics, and it really rides the line where I think it totally works. I think this movie's art style is awesome. It's so cool looking. The second shot of the film, so the opening of the movie is the main character Jim as a little kid, and he's reading this holographic storybook, or it's sort of being narrated to him by the book itself. He's reading this holographic storybook, and it's telling him the story of this pirate, space pirate Captain Flint. And like the second shot of the movie, it's like Flint, and he's standing on the edge. He's like standing on the boat on his ship with like he's this crazy looking alien with like this tentacle head and like 6 eyes, and he's in this pirate outfit, and there's like this other ship flying past him in flame, and it flames. It looks like it's out of a fucking like Studio Trigger anime. And I was like, this movie's so fucking cool. And Kat was laughing at me. She's like, it's the second shot of the movie. What ends up happening, okay, when they find the treasure map, it's like this little sphere that when you click it into the right, sort of like a Rubik's Cube, into the right setting, this big hologram appears all over, and it like spreads all over the room, and there's like planets and all these little holographic planets, and it's moving and shaping. And Kat went, okay, you know what? This movie is pretty cool. And they start charting a course. They're like, oh, we're gonna chart a course. We're gonna put an expedition together, and they point out the window. A character points out the window at the crescent moon, which has been in the background the whole time, right? It's this moon, a crescent moon, and you start zooming in on the moon, and you get closer and closer, and you realize it's not actually a moon. It's a spaceport in the shape of a crescent moon. And I was like, and she was like, and I was like, isn't this the fucking coolest thing you've ever seen? This movie, everything is just like that. Everything is just so fucking sick just to look at visually. So Jim, right, is the main character. After this opening of him in the reading the pirate book, and his mom coming in, and she's like, "Oh, okay, fine, I'll read you the story before I tuck you into bed one more time." And then we hard cut to Jim as a teenager, and he's on this like solar surfboard. It's like a personal surfboard. But it flies through the air like a hoverboard, and it's powered by solar. All the vehicles are powered by like solar energy. And there's this awesome just opening intro scene of him flying through this kind of like industrial zone, and it's just beautifully animated. This movie uses a ton of it's traditional 2D animation, CGI. And what Disney, a technology that Disney developed for Tarzan called Deep Canvas. Deep Canvas is essentially, it's like a technology, and it's also kind of like a pipeline, like a work pipeline, where they could create 3D environments, and then composite hand-drawn elements. Animations into the 3D environments. And it is absolute. So all those scenes in Tarzan where he's like surfing down the tree trunks and all that, that's all using Deep Canvas. Like a lot of the environment there is CG. Looks very clean, very seamless because of the compositing, the texture work, and all that. It is even better here. There are like almost every shot in this movie is using Deep Canvas. The entire boat that a lot of it takes place on is CG. That entire environment is CGI. And you almost never notice it unless you're looking for it specifically. And this opening scene is just this awesome. He's just flipping and riding through all these this machinery and stuff like that. And this landscape, beautiful looking. And then then the cops come in, and they bring him back to the inn, and they say, hey, one more infraction, and he's going to go to juvenile detention. He's going to get locked up, He's going to be on your record, kid. And you start to get the understanding that Jim is at some point between the opening of the movie and now, his father left, seemingly without a word. And Jim has left. He's been left behind. Him and his mom. His mom is really overwhelmed trying to run the inn to support them and still raise her son. Jim doesn't have a really strong father figure in his life, and he's a lost youth, And he's rebelling, and he's trying to express himself and find his own kind of sense of freedom. It's a very coming of age, very classic coming of age kind of protagonist. His mom says I'm just worried about you. You're going to throw away your future. And he just sort of dejectedly, he's opening the door, and before he leaves, he just kind of mutters like, "What future?" And that's the point in his life that he's at. All that changes when inciting incident happens. Suddenly there's a ship crashes from outer space, and Jim goes outside to help. He's like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" This old pirate, Billy Bones, pops out, and he hands him a treasure chest. He hands him a chest, and he says, "Watch out for the cyborg." And Jim is like, "Okay, what the fuck?" He brings him inside. Bones dies. I'm pretty sure he dies there or something like that. And then before they know it, before they even really understand what's happening, him, his mom, and a friend of his mother, and Dr. Doppler, who's like a dog man. He's like a an astrophysicist, I believe. He's a professor who frequents like the inn's restaurant, and he's friends with Jim's mom. All three of them escape, and as this band of pirates crashes the inn and burns it down. So now they've got nothing left. And what I like about it is that there's Jim is never blamed for this, right? He's never blamed for bringing them to it. His mom understands completely that, like, this is not your fault in any way. It just fucking sucks because we just lost our entire life. And Doppler essentially has them staying in his like an apartment that I guess he has. And they have no idea what they're going to do. When eventually Jim figures out how they open the treasure box and they find the map. And that's when all that happens. And Jim says, "Oh my God, Mom, that's where the treasure leads. That's like the story that I read when I was a kid. I can go and I can make everything right. I can get the treasure and we can rebuild the inn and get our lives back." And he really wants to make this up to her. And she's worried. And Dr. Doppler's like, oh, he's super into the idea because he thinks it'll be awesome and fun and a great adventure. And it's like, he convinces her to do it because it'll be good for him. And, hey, what's the worst that can happen? Some character building? Doppler, you sort of get the sense that Doppler is almost like a father figure to Jim. Because he's an adult man in his life. But it's kind of like Jim likes Doppler well enough, but it's kind of like Doppler is too different from him to really relate to. You get the feeling that they've never really had like a strong heart-to-heart, or Doppler is like, he's a little too bookish and a little too intellectual to be able to kind of understand or connect to Jim on an emotional level. So despite clearly caring for him and wanting him to do well and figure his life out and what he's going to do, Doppler's just never quite able to make that connection with him. So they arrange for this expedition to be carried out. There's led by the cat girl, cat woman, Captain Amelia, who was certainly someone's sexual awakening. Not mine, because I'm not a fucking weirdo. But yeah, she's very like she's very like elegant and a little bit a little hoity-toity. But she's pretty fun. And then the real, I guess, important character introduction is the fry cook of the ship, John Silver. Like Long John Silver from the original. So John Silver, the first thing you see of him is his fucking cyborg arm. And Jim is instantly suspicious of him. He's like, cyborg. And Jim has basically been assigned to be an assistant to John. Jimmy Johns. And he doesn't trust him. He doesn't like him. The crew doesn't really like Jim. They're all a bunch of these rough and tough aliens. And they kind of antagonize him. You learn pretty quickly that Silver is, in fact, the bad guy. They make it apparent very, very fast that Silver is, maybe if not exactly the cyborg in question, although you can imagine that he is, you can infer that he is planning a mutiny on the ship using the crew that, he is secretly the leader of. Excuse me. And naturally that puts him and the rest of his group, his crew, at odds with anyone who is not a part of them. One of those being Jim, because they're not going to share it with some random kid, right? They're trying to find the treasure too, and take it for themselves. My brain's starting to slow down. So a lot of this movie... So the best thing about this movie, I think, is the relationship between Jim and John Silver. Because at the start, Jim is very hesitant and he doesn't trust Silver. And you don't trust Silver. You can tell that he's up to no good. But there's this really interesting emotional push and pull where the longer that they work together, the more Silver, you sort of get the idea that he's starting to kind of actually feel some affection for Jim. You know, one of his crewmates, Mr. Scroop, who's like a big spider guy, is the most antagonistic towards Jim. And he straight up like threatens him, and he's gonna like really fuck him up, if not kill him. And Silver has to stop him from doing that. And he defends him, which sort of puts him in an awkward place. And he has to kind of rationalize it to them as being like, oh, don't fucking cause any problems. But at the same time, you're like, oh, okay, well, he's helping out Jim. And they really start to form a kind of father-son connection. And there's a montage in this movie, right? And this montage is great. I was actually getting pretty emotional during it. It's set to a song. It's called "I'm Still Here," which I think is Jim's theme, written and performed by John Resnick of the Goo Goo Dolls. John Rzeznik. And it's just, I don't know, it's like a pretty, I like the song. It's a very modern kind of rock sounding song, but it compared to the rest of the score, but I don't know, it works because it punctuates the moment, and it makes it feel very special. And you're just seeing, you know, the various day-to-day of their lives on the ship, Jim doing chores and stuff like that, and not really enjoying it. But you could see them kind of this sort of sense of camaraderie between him and Silver forming that eventually turns into kind of on Jim's end an admiration for him, and on Silver's a real sense of caring. And there's a great bit in this montage where near like the emotional peak, like the build up to the emotional peak, you get this scene where Silver kind of like shows him down in the kind of like lower end of the ship, where they've got this little side, I don't know what they're called. It's like a small boat that can be detached from underneath, from the underbelly. And he opens the gate, and the ship is lowering down, and Jim is watching it. Jim is watching Silver descend on this boat down into space. Space, by the way, in this is it's not really like outer space like we know it. It's sort of like a fantasy space. It's called like the ether or the Ethereum, which is kind of like, it's like breathable. It's like if space was the ocean. It's breathable. Well, yeah, obviously the ocean's not breathable, but you can like sail through it. You won't die by being exposed to it. It's like open air essentially. And the winds or the waves are solar. They're like solar waves generated by stars, which is really cool. And Silver is like, you know, descending, and Jim is watching him drop down. And he gets this flashback to waking up the day that his father is leaving. You don't get any explanation. All you get are just the visuals of him waking up, looking out the window, and seeing his dad walking away towards some ship. And Jim like throws his clothes on, and he's a little kitty. He runs out, and he's waving at his dad. He's calling to him. His dad gets on the ship, and he doesn't even turn around. He doesn't even turn around to say, without a word, without a wave. And like, it's heartbreaking. It's gut-wrenching. And then you cut back, and Jim is seeing Silver descending down on this boat. and he motions for Jim to jump down with him, and it hits you, and you're like, oh, oh. You're like, oh, like the emotion, and he jumps down, and they start sailing, and they sail through like essentially like a space cloud, and they're all this kind of snow and is caught on them, and Jim is sailing for it because he's navigating, and because he knows how to sail, and it's a really beautiful sequence. I'm usually not one for montages, but that one really, like, okay, this is what the movie is about. This is like the emotional core. Like, you're so invested in their relationship, right? And it kind of creates a greater sense of tension because you know at some point there's going to be pressure for Silver to turn his back on Jim. And you're kind of wondering, when's it going to happen? What is going to happen? And this is followed immediately by them getting back and Silver giving Jim this kind of like pep talk, and he's telling him like, you can do great things. I believe in you. You can chart your own course. And you can tell it's the first time Jim has ever heard this from anyone. That this person that he looks up to, that he now trusts and sees as kind of like a mentor and kind of a father figure that he didn't have. And he's telling him that, like, no, I believe in you. And I think he even starts tearing up. And it's a really, really deep, heavy emotional scene, and it really, I think Kat said she got a little teared up during it even. And it's like, their relationship is the core of the movie, and it's the most interesting thing about it. And unlike Brother Bear, Treasure Planet absolutely brings that interesting element all the way home. The whole movie centers around really this relationship. Afterwards, you get this scene of Jim. All right, there's this funny little character, this little goop guy. He's like this flying little goopy guy. His name is Morph, and he can like turn into little objects and shapeshift and all that. He's a little pink fella. And Jim is chasing Morph. He winds up like finding him in a barrel, and while he's in this barrel, overhears Silver meeting with the crew, and this is when Jim learns that the mutiny is underfoot. It's being planned, and Scroop, Spider Guy, basically said, because he overheard the little pep talk speech that Silver gave to Jim, and he basically accuses him. He reveals that he basically exposes him in front of everyone else. And Silver, it's a really interesting scene because Silver essentially says that he didn't mean any of that, and he's just saying it to get him off their trail and to use him. He basically says, I've been lying to him the whole time. And Jim's hearing this, and obviously that's incredibly damaging to hear, and it really disturbs him and distresses him. But you don't know. You don't know how much of it Silver really means. Like, that's what's so great. The emotional push and pull, that's what I mean. You're never quite sure what's going on under the surface, because you don't know what's the act that he has to put on, or what is his real thoughts, and his actions can sometimes conflict. You can see almost an internal struggle going on. So there's this whole sequence where they get to the planet, which has two rings which form an X, which is very funny and I think it's cute. And excuse me. That the mutiny under it that happens. Jim, Amelia, and Doppler escape. They think they have the map. They don't really, but they don't find that out for a second. And now they're on the planet. And the last, I want to say like 30 to 40% of the movie is them on the planet, and basically a race to try and find how to get to the actual treasure. They aren't sure how to get to the treasure. They end up finding this android voiced by Martin Short named Ben, who a lot of people don't like. Kat did not really care for the voice. She didn't really like the voice. I know some people just find Ben really obnoxious. I never found Ben that annoying. It's a little much. I wish it had been toned down a teensy-weensy bit, but I generally didn't have that much of a problem with his character. And I think he serves... I'm pretty sure he's like a combining of like two different characters from the original Treasure Island. Of like, he's essentially the crazed expat who they find on the island, who's been there for way too long, and Ben has like lost his memory module. So Ben is also an entirely CGI character, and when I talk about the seamless integration, there's scenes where Ben and other animated characters are directly like touching, like interacting up against each other. And it looks really good. He obviously looks different, but it fits. I think he fits in pretty well for what he is. Silver's cyborg arm and leg are also entirely CG, and they look great because of the way that they're rendered. On an animated character, which is really cool. A 2D animated character with CGI elements. It looks fantastic. It looks seamless. From there to the end of the movie, there's some interesting back and forth. Oh, there's a great sequence where they find out that they actually didn't have the map. The map was actually Morph, who had changed into the map. The map sphere is still on the ship. And they're like, fuck, how do I get back up? So Jim and Ben go back to the ship because Amelia's hurt. Doppler stays behind to give her some medicinal attention. Ooh la la. And he was back up to the ship, and they're looking for the map. They're trying to get down to the place that he remembers the map being at. And Scroop, the spider guy, is still on the ship. And he finds them, and Ben is like trying to they're trying to like open a door or something, and Ben is trying to like override the security or something like that. And while Jim is on the run from Spider Guy, Ben ends up accidentally unhooking the power to the lights, so it goes on backup power, and Jim's pointing a gun at Scroop. He's pointing like a flintlock pistol that shoots lasers. And all of a sudden the lights go dark. The backup lights come on, all red. And he's just in this dense, claustrophobic hallway. And it just turns, and Scroop is gone. He's not in front of him anymore. And it just turns into a scene from Alien. And it's like the coolest shit ever. And it just, I totally forgot about this. I'm like, oh my god. It's just like, this whole sequence could have gone in so many different ways. And instead they decided to turn it into this awesome, like, aliens being stalked in this, like, tight hallway. And it just, the movie just pulls out these awesome scenes so casually. It's so good. It's so fucking good. It's such a cool sequence because it just happens. It goes on for maybe a minute or two, and then it's done. It gets resolved, and it's great. It's so good. And then finally, they get down to, they end up getting captured. This is kind of, all the characters come together. the Silver forces Jim to show them the way, and their interactions after the mutiny are very icy, and it's like, man, you feel it, like it hurts. It hurts when Jim is so angry at Silver because of how strong the relationship was before. And you can kind of feel like Silver also kind of regrets it. And it's like, again, the internal grappling is so compelling to me. So they go back to, or they get all the, they eventually find, like, it's at the center of the planet. It's this portal that they have to open, this teleportation portal thing that they get in, and they end up tripping the planet's self-destruct switch. There's this crazy sequence where they've got to escape. They end up escaping, but the planet's going to explode before the ship can take off. And they're like, how do we get off? And Jim's like, the teleport portal that you can go anywhere in the galaxy. So let's fly the ship into the portal. And he like makeshifts this, like he takes like a jet engine and like a piece of metal, and he kind of MacGyvers it together into a jet surfboard like he's used to riding. And he has to fly forward ahead of the ship. And it's like the beginning of the movie where he's in his own way, he's trying to gain independence and express himself. And then whereas at the beginning of the movie, he was punished for it and was told that kind of behavior was going to ruin his life. Now he's going to do it to save the day. Everything came full circle. So of course he does it. Everyone gets home. Silver tosses him some gold that he picked up, that he saved from the core of the planet. Oh yeah, well, in that whole escape sequence, while they're trying to get out of the treasure room, Jim is gonna die. He's gonna fall into this like chasm, and Silver ends up choosing Jim. He saves Jim over the gold. And it's like, nice. So at the end of the day, Silver himself did change. He did change. He did turn. I would almost describe him, and then at the end of the movie, he just sort of disappears. He disappears. Jim ends up getting a recommendation from Captain Amelia to enter like the Space Pilot Academy, and then you get this great little scene of the inn that's been rebuilt using the money from the planet, from Treasure Planet. And Jim comes home from his academy. He's in his uniform. They have a dance, and you get another kind of modern song that's pretty catchy. And Jim looks out at the window, and he sees in the clouds this sort of goofy image of it looks like John Silver, like his face. And then credits. And then we hit the credits, and Cal is like, that was really good. That was really good. And I'm like, yeah, isn't it? Isn't that one so good? She said she still prefers Lilo and Stitch. And that's fair. I can respect that. But for me, what this movie goes for and what it accomplishes is so interesting. It's so ambitious. It works, and it's so successful. It fucking nails it. And I think it's so good. Like, everything about it is just wonderful. I was going to say, I almost would kind of describe Silver as, he's almost like an anti-villain, you know? There's like anti-heroes. Silver's almost like an anti-villain. And I think that's really interesting that he isn't so clear-cut. He isn't so clear-cut of he's just bad. It isn't simple, right? And what I liked about it is the movie doesn't have to hammer you over the head with his character development or what's going on. You see it through his actions. You see it through his interactions with the other characters, with Jim specifically. It is a really interesting, compelling character arc, because Jim is such a, I don't know, I think he's really likable in a lot of ways. Maybe that type of character doesn't work for everyone, but I liked him a lot. I think it's a very unique struggle for especially a Disney protagonist to have. I mean, I'm trying to think of Disney protagonists whose main struggle, like real internal struggle, is that they like are lost because they lost like their father figure. That's a very rare thing to see in a film like this. And you go online and there's a lot of people who resonated very deeply with his character, who had similar upbringings, and seeing him figure it out and go on this adventure and kind of meet these characters who kind of show him the way, and even like what's so great about him and Silver is that they both help each other. Silver gives Jim a confidence through like his speech, but then also eventually, funny enough, through the mutiny, through Jim kind of being on his own when after Amelia is sort of disabled, after she's injured, Jim has to kind of take the reins and he has to take control and figure out a plan, and that puts him in a position where he has to really grow up and become a man, like the theme of the movie, kind of. And then Jim, through kind of being this sort of just kid who needs some help, ends up softening up Silver in a way that he wasn't expecting. And he ends up becoming a better person. At the end, when Jim is like, aren't you upset that you lost all the treasure? And then Silver says like, it was just a lifelong obsession. I'll get over it. And it's like this thing he spent his entire life searching for, this external treasure, right? This gold and all these, this very literal monetary treasure. Really, and it's corny, but really, in the end, what the real thing he got out of it was he became a better person because of that was the real treasure, the real reward. And that's why he's content at the end. Like, he's happy. He's actually happy with the way that things turned out. It's so good. It's so good. Such a fucking good movie. I would highly recommend. I mean, I know I just spoiled like the entire movie for you, right? But I would highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. I think it's legitimately, having seen now a pretty good chunk of Disney's catalog, I genuinely think it's the best movie they ever made. At least animated wise. Other people are going to disagree with me on that, but for me, this is the one. Like, this is the most interesting, compelling, deep story with great characters, amazing visuals. It's so seamless, right? I've used that word a lot, but it really is just all these little shots where the camera is moving and the characters are running around it. It's so dynamic looking and fluid. Just so sick. Absolutely love this movie. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's the difference between, like I was talking about Brother Bear, right? I was talking about Brother Bear. Now that movie goes from being a family movie to a kids movie. Treasure Planet is a family movie. As in children. I mean, when I was a kid, I watched it. It's age appropriate. It's got a little, it's the most harmless violence, you know? It isn't gory. Apparently there was a little bit of blood, I think, when Amelia gets injured, but that was actually taken out of later releases. I kind of forget. I didn't notice any when we watched it. Which I believe was the VHS copy or the DVD. I don't remember. Because we pirated it. What was I gonna say? Right. It's very approachable and understandable for kids, but I think as an adult, it is a genuinely very compelling quality story with good writing and good dialogue and good characters. Like it's a great film, just all around. It's like all ages can enjoy it, and not just like by technicality. Like, well, really, it's made for kids, but there's some adult jokes thrown in there. It's not like It's not like Sonic 2. Remember when I said that? Remember when I had the dad opinion that I liked the human parts of Sonic 2 more than the Sonic parts? Yeah. Oh, yeah, check it out. Absolutely. And of course, it's so fitting. There's another rant. It's so fitting that Treasure Planet is my favorite Disney movie because it's the one that they tried that they intentionally sabotaged to kill. If you don't know this, so some of you might be hearing this and you're like, I've never heard of Treasure Planet, huh? This movie was essentially sent out to die by Disney. Now, again, this is not confirmed, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, as well as I've read some accounts over the years of people who, for instance, had professors in their animation courses who worked on this film and knew a little inside details and knew what was going on. And essentially, at this point in time, 2002, when this movie came out, Disney was... I don't believe they'd bought Pixar entirely yet, but they were moving towards buying Pixar. And remember when I said, I think in the last episode, that like I could hear the board meeting talking about how CG animated films are the new way and 2D is people don't want that anymore. This was the movie that Disney used to prove that. Not because it's bad. Not because the 2D animation is bad. It's gorgeous. It's because the film was under-marketed. The marketing, in a lot of ways, was pretty bad and didn't really sell the movie very well. And also, I've heard anecdotally, a lot of people at the time of the release just had a hard time finding showings of it. Like, it seems like it was just not shown in a lot of theaters. Like, it's in, like, people, so being like, yeah, I remember at the time trying to find a showing for Treasure Planet, and I just couldn't find one. It was like, this is an animated Disney movie. Why is it so hard to find a theater that's playing this film? This was like the sacrificial lamb to prove that audiences did not want 2D animated films anymore. Because it was so expensive and it did so poorly. I believe it's their biggest box office bomb of all time. Maybe. It might have been superseded by something, but at least animated, it was for a very, very long time. And it would essentially... No, it would not be the last one they made, because it was not the last... it was not the last one produced. It was not the last 2D animated film produced. That would be our next film. But it was the last one that they finished up, I believe. So you should go watch it for that, to spite them. What a great like symbolism, like metaphor, real life poetry for my relationship to Disney as a company. That my absolute favorite movie of theirs, that I think is their best that they've ever made, was also the one that they tried to kill, that they hate. How perfect.